The Africa Report, 12th of October 2023, Power Plays, despite geopolitics and China's insolvency, why are more African leaders traveling to China? Even though the world has changed, African politicians continue seeking unobtainable free money from China. Even though October is just beginning, the number of trips from African leaders to China is already higher than usual. Leading African figures have visited China in large numbers since it lifted its zero-COVID policy in January 2023. 8 months later, the second biggest economy in the world has welcomed 5 foreign ministers from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, and Zimbabwe, as well as 7 African presidents from Tanzania, Algeria, Eritrea, Mauritania, Burundi, Benin, and Zambia. Even though it's only September, there have already been more visitors than usual. The average annual visitation from 2009 to 2018 was 7. The COVID-19 pandemic inevitably caused a decline in visits, which reached just 4 in 2022 and none in 2021. This suggests that African leaders are trying to catch up with China since the country opened its borders in January 2023. It also shows that the US-China geopolitical rivalry and accusations of Chinese debt traps have not impeded the advancement of China-Africa relations. However, why are African leaders so eager to travel to China now that its borders have opened? In 2021, our company discovered that trips by African leaders to China led to a rise in Chinese commerce and investment, the signing of new agreements, and the revision of pre-existing ones. In the end, we discovered compelling proof that these trips were assisting African leaders in realizing their aspirations for development. This explains the high number of visits from African leaders, 222 from 2009 to 2018. Crucially, Chinese officials prioritize the continent of Africa. Chinese officials made 82 trips to 40 African nations in the same time frame. It's also noteworthy that, from 2019 to 2023, 29 Chinese leaders traveled to Africa despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Even though President Xi himself was only virtually present at FOCAC 2021, they continued their customary diplomatic ties with Africa, which included the yearly tradition of China's foreign minister beginning his globe trip to Africa. Remarkably, and consistent with our earlier findings, visits are still not reciprocal, which means that an African nation receiving 1 or more visits from high-ranking Chinese officials does not guarantee that the African country will reciprocate, and vice versa. This implies that African leaders are traveling to China in response to their own needs, not those of China. For instance, China traveled to Egypt 3 times between 2019 and 2023 without Egypt returning the favor, making Egypt the most frequent destination for African Chinese officials. Conversely, Zambia and Sierra Leone organized 2 trips to China but did not receive a reciprocal visit. In light of this, why are African nations interacting with China if there is still little agreement, and how has this changed between 2009 and 2018? We did observe a few minor adjustments. First, the trips between 2019 and 2023 were characterized by a recurring theme of trade agreements, with at least 13 SPS agreements enabling the export of different African agricultural products to China immediately following a visit by leaders or soon afterward. 6 of these agreements resulted from an African leadership visit to China, and 7 came about as a result of a Chinese leadership visit to the advantageous African nation. This suggests that visits that are the result of both parties bearing equal weight in terms of their worth and potential influence. We have also observed that without explicitly declaring trade agreements, high-level visits by African leaders can lead to notable changes in the continent's exports to China. For instance, China announced its intention to lessen its reliance on Australia's iron ore exports, which is Sierra Leone's principal export to China, during the country's continuing trade war with Australia, which coincided with the country's two visits by Sierra Leone to China in 2019 and 2023. A joint economic and technical cooperation agreement was reached during the 2019 visit, and as a result, Sierra Leone's exports to China increased significantly, from $179 million in 2019 to $762 million in 2022. Sierra Leone has benefited from the New Deal. Second, contrary to what some pundits have said, all comments made during the African presidential visit included language about African nations reaffirming their commitment to the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Thirdly, we observed that African leaders' trips to China were turning into more calculated events that produced deals and foreign direct investment to support long-term objectives for economic expansion. Consider the $290 million foreign direct investment, FDI, made for a lithium battery manufacturing factory during Zambian President Hichilema's recent trip to China in September 2023. This investment was made to begin processing Zambia's vast copper resources. While this is undoubtedly a tremendous start, what more can be done? Deliberate tactics using restricted Chinese currency. Notably, a continent or regional strategy and coordination with neighboring countries remain conspicuously absent from African leadership visits. The only exceptions are Tanzania and Zambia's joint plans to upgrade the Tazara Railway and report about Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda coordinating on an SGR extension, though the latter is still unclear. Regional coordination will be even more crucial as the African Continental Free Trade Area (AFCFTA) is implemented. Moreover, unlike recent Chinese visits to Asia, no particular projects sponsored by Chinese banks were named, despite widespread verbal and written commitments to work on the BRI. This has led to rumors that China is pulling back on funding infrastructure projects in Africa. But rather than a regression, our data points to a pause brought on by slowdowns brought on by COVID-19. However, considering the infrastructure finance requirements of African countries to accomplish their SDGs, a renewed drive by African leaders to secure infrastructure financing and BRI projects is imperative. Africa is experiencing several global shocks, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine and the ensuing food and energy crises, rising inflation, tightening of debt, and the climate emergency. As a result, visits to China, a crucial partner for 53 African countries, will become increasingly significant as African nations strive to maintain their development plans. Given that it's not always a given that this occurs when African leaders travel abroad, the ongoing intent behind these leadership visits and their regular results are unquestionably a positive step. However, as demonstrated here, more can be done. More agreements, similar to Zambia's, to develop value-added industries for processing natural resources will guarantee that these visits have an even more significant influence. Better yet, and no doubt more difficult, would be to see African nations or even regions organizing these trips in tandem to generate concessional financing and foreign direct investment for new infrastructure agreements that take advantage of one another's resources or manufacturing capabilities. This will support the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area and Africa's goal of becoming the world's next manufacturing hub. Now is the moment to take action and start developing even more deliberate strategies to make sure African leaders benefit the most from their relationship with China, especially with the third BRI Forum and the upcoming Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, scheduled to take place in China in late 2024.